Baruch Rabbi, Mekat Yamtiv. Welcome to the panel / question and answer session in continuation of the Iberleben Mivtza, which many of you here, or all of you actually, participated in over the last few months. And a big mazel tov for all the Misaimim. Mr. Shem, there should only be haschala to continue on to other Farbrengens in other years and going Mechal el-Choyel and al-Nyanim. To begin the program, we will like to ask a shliach of the Rebbe in El Paso, Texas, Rabbi Greenberg, to address us in regards to listening Farbrengens today and how to apply them to daily life. Rabbi Levi Greenberg, please.
I remember always hearing that Yud Shevat is Rosh Hashanah Kashrus. If you listen to the first Farbrengen, it's not the first, but the Farbrengen of Yud Shevat, Tafshin Yud Aleph, after the Maimer, so the Rebbe says, you're going to have to work as well. Yeah, don't think that I'm going to do the work for you. You're going to have to work yourself. And the Rebbe says, I'm not going to hold back. I'm definitely going to help. However, if you're not going to do the work yourself, vet nicht helfen, as me vet geben ksavim, reden, singen anigen und sagen l'chaim. The Rebbe said, if you're not going to do the work yourself, the fact that I'm going to give ksavim, the fact that I'm going to speak, sing anigen, and say l'chaim is not going to help. Today in Tafshin Pei Beis, we're marking 72 years of Der Ashvi, and we still have a job ahead of us. To be mamshich the Shechina Lamata, to bring Mashiach. And the Rebbe said that he will help us. We're going to have to do our part, but the Rebbe is going to help. And it seems that in that Sikha, the Rebbe indicates how he's going to help. He's going to give ksavim. He's going to give Torah to learn, look at the Sikhis, Maimorim, etc. And then he describes a Farbrengen, Reden, Singen Anigin, und Sagen L'chaim. This is my personal observation that a chassid in Der Ashvi, to have the ability to face the challenges of this era of Der Ashvi, to go on the Rebbe Shlichus, etc. It's very important to learn the Ksavim, it's very important to learn the Kutasichis and the Maimorim. But there's also the idea of the Farbrengens. The fact that the Rebbe Farbrengs so many hours. The fact that as the years went on, the Farbrengens became even more often. The experience of the Farbrengen itself was integral and essential. And many can ask, I'm going to hear about a Farbrengen and hear how Farbrengens worked, and the Yuds, the Chavs, the Lamids, the Mems, but it's history. Chas v'sholom. When you take a Farbrengen today and you listen to a Farbrengen, you watch a Farbrengen, the Farbrengen is happening right now. I remember very little from Farbrengens. The only memory I have of Farbrengen, I was 5 years old. It was a summer Farbrengen, Shabbos. And I remember saying l'chaim to the Rebbe. My father told me to drink because the Rebbe said l'chaim to me. And I remember the nigen emasai kol simar. That's my only memory from a Farbrengen. So as a bacher, I had no memories of Farbrengens. But I would eat up everything that I was able to hear from anyone that would talk about Farbrengens. My father would talk about Farbrengens, my grandfather, any chassidim. And for years, it was like history. But then I started to listen. I started to listen to the Farbrengens. And I discovered that the Farbrengens are available to us today, not as a recording of something that happened then, but it's a Lebedike Rebbe that is speaking to us today. And so as you're here by this panel, I don't see any better way to spend your Yud Shevat than to hear from Chassidim, there's a chenes of the Farbrengens. But know that it's not just a lesson in history. This is describing the eitzes that are available to you and to me today. L'chaim.
So the primary way of how the Rebbe communicated with Chassidim throughout the years was by the Farbrengens. Of course, we all know that there's a Igros Kodesh. The Rebbe sent thousands letters throughout the years. not hundreds of thousands. And then there was the dollars later on. And then there was Yechidus, of course. But the primary way of how the Rebbe would sort of express himself, world views, and be mevarer different chalakim and Torah. That was all through the Farbrengens, we all know. This often could be compared to the fact that a person, when they walk into a dark room, the Rebbe would actually often use this mashal to describe the ufta of Chassidus and in general the lichtigkeit of Torah. When a person walks into a dark room, everything is there. He might think a chair is a pot. He may not know exactly what everything is, but he can't obviously see anything or notice what anything is. However, when the person turns on light, the same things are still there, of course. However, now there's a lichtigkeit. There's a sense of clarity. The same thing is in regards to the Rebbe's Farbrengens. The Rebbe addresses literally every single issue that one may encounter, whatever stage in life you are. The amount of sichos which the Rebbe devoted specifically to Bachrim, especially in the earlier years. It's a message for us that if you want to truly have the Rebbe's perspective on various issues and on various ideas in life, it's only through the Farbrengens. So let's jump right into the panel. I'd like to introduce the panelists today, starting from the first on the table, Rabbi Aharon Blesofksy. Rabbi Blesofksy will be addressing the late Yuds and the Chavs of his childhood memories of then as well as Rabbi Sholom Duchman, who was a Bacher who grew up in Crown Heights and was a Bacher in the Lamids, who can give us a sort of a feeling of the vibes of those Farbrengens. And then as well, later, moving on to the Lamids, onto the Mems, we have Rabbi Yosef Lu, Shliach of the Rebbe in Peachtree City in Georgia, and he will be addressing the Mems. Then finally, Rabbi Mendel, Shliach of the Rebbe in Minnesota, will be addressing the Nuns. So, Rabbi Blesofksy, you were zeichet to grow up in Crown Heights and be by the Rebbe in the early years of the Nisias, in the later years of the Yuds and early Chavs. If you could please address us of how those Farbrengens, first of all, were really situated, and as kind of just bring us into the room of those Farbrengens in the early years.
I'll tell you, I'll say exactly what I remember about the Yuds. In the Yuds, I was born in Yud Aleph, so the Farbrengens were in the Zal till they built the shul downstairs. Big Farbrengens were in the Shalash, where there was no roof. There was a tarp at the top. But I was a boy, and the Zal was so packed, I don't think I ever made it inside, literally. If I did, I don't remember. So the only thing I do remember is that as a child, the wall was so verschwitzt from the crowd that I used to make a line on the schwitz on the outside, with an enamel painted wall in the long hallway. So my memories of the Yuds is a playful memory, nothing of Teuch. Now downstairs, that was already the Zal, the Shalash Zal. That's when the Farbrengen was already in a much larger hall, and the Shalash was turned into a shul with a roof, with walls, with a heater, and the windows. The first 2 years, if you look in pictures, were these plastic windows that flipped around. As a matter of fact, I had one of my places for half a year was I would stand by a plastic window and twist it open halfway. I was able to hear the Rebbe. It was only 4 or 5 feet away from the Rebbe, because the Rebbe would be on the beam. Behind the Rebbe was only one row of benches. What else?
When did the Farbrengens change locations from the Zal upstairs in 70 to the Shalash?
I can't exactly when they built.
I'm sorry. You remember Farbrengens upstairs?
Where's the mic on?
I remember there was Farbrengens in the Zal, but I never got inside. It was too packed. was like a sardine can. You
I don't
couldn't,
remember upstairs, I remember downstairs.
no, upstairs, I remember being there, but
The last,
we came, I lived in Williamsburg then, so we came from
the last Farbrengen upstairs was on the second night of Pesach, Tafshin Yud Tes.
Okay.
That was the final. So you were old enough.
And after that was shalash, because it was warm enough outside, we could make it in
And
shalash.
then Chav, yeah,
The Chavte, they put up the shul already. Yes.
Yes.
So Farbrengen, there was a Farbrengen, do I remember there was, I was never inside. I saw tapes of it, but that's it, everyone here in the room can see those tapes. I would like to give her order before when during the first years, the years I remember when Rebbe came into Farbrengen, you people watch videos now, the Rebbe's coming in and just singing. In the early years, I'm talking about in the Chofs, when the Rebbe came into Farbrengen, the place was so quiet. I'll use a cliche, you can hear a pin drop. The Rebbe came in, it was quiet. When the Rebbe made Kiddush, you waited till the Rebbe finished Kiddush. He said L'chaim to the people behind him. Then he said L'chaim to the crowd. And then he would start answering L'chaim to people, saying L'chaim to him. And at that point, he started the Chassidish Niggin. Not like when the Rebbe came in was Hub Kazak. It was different. It was much more Malchusdik in that respect.
In the Chofs and the Lamets, if I can add, the Rebbe wouldn't make Kiddush downstairs. When you would walk into the Farbrengen, except twice a year, Shabbos, Shabbos Bereishis and Shabbos Shmini, right? Shabbos Eftach Pesach, Shabbos Varchim Ir. There, besides those two times, the Rebbe there was almost except the Yitzim and Aklal, the Rebbe wouldn't make Kiddush
There was
downstairs.
only a watch on the table, a watch.
It was only a watch and the napkins.
Yes.
That's number one that I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is, and not so much related to Farbrengen, that what Ali said before, that in the early years, in the Lamed, Chofs Lamed, the Rebbe would come into Zal, Sai when the Rebbe came into davening, and Sai when the Rebbe came to Farbrengen, it was quiet. There was one exception. The exception was when the Rebbe went out to the parade. The Rebbe went out to the parade. That was the only time that the Rebbe came out. He used to sing.
Amen.
Amen. Exactly. So the tziyur is pashat, not to give it over. The first time that the Rebbe came into davening that they were singing was, I believe, in the Ramad. I believe it was Tafshul Ramadala. That's the way I believe. That the Rebbe came into the mincha. It was the first day Sukkot in the afternoon, and there was a few bachim that were there. That had a few L'chaims. There was a few Bochum that had a few L'chaims, and the Rebbe came in and he started singing, and the Rebbe turned around and was making in an unbelievable way. And from that time on, I think that's the way it went. That's the way it started. And when the Rebbe came in, it was always singing Bishas going into davening.
Since we're talking about simple things, but it's Kedaitz of American, that there was a different Seder on Shabbos than the program during the week. And during the week Farbrengen, and this you have videos of, when the Rebbe came in, the Rebbe, as soon as the Rebbe sat down, it was quiet, and the Rebbe began the Farbrengen. He started right away. Shabbos, on the other hand, when the Rebbe came in, there was a niggin, and there was the procedure of filling up the Rebbe's becher, and the Rebbe, you could see it on video, it's something similar. But on video, it happens after always the first sicha. And on Shabbos, it happens before the Farbrengen starts. That you can't see on a video. But the Rebbe, of course, would take, when he came in, the Rebbe would take the becher himself and take a napkin and wipe it out. It was already washed before, but the Rebbe did the hadocha himself. And then Rabbi Mendel used to fill the Rebbe's kois. Afterwards, Rabbi Eunuch. And the Rebbe would like push it a little bit for them to take. They would fill it up a little bit away from the Rebbe and then sort of move it back to the Rebbe. That you could see it on a video. And at that time, the Rebbe would also always take 2 pieces of cake and put it into a napkin in the inside of a napkin, so that the napkin, there was a napkin on the bottom and a napkin on top. And the Rebbe always took 2 pieces. So Shabbos, some people like to say it had to do with Lechem Mishnah, but that's beyond my pay grade. I'm just telling you what happened, just the facts. And
You didn't mention, they always said Yeshkeach every time.
that's after when Rabbi Mendel brought it back, the Rebbe would
Always said
and he would
Yeshkeach.
nod his head also. You could see that also on the video that Rebbe would say Eshekeach. If we go back a little bit earlier, just to how, although I'm representing officially, I think the nuns, and this didn't happen in the nuns for whatever reason it happened. Well, it happened, but through someone else. But and I do remember the Farbrengens and the Lameds as a boy and the Mems even as a bocher also. Although I'm younger than Rabbi Lou, my cousin sang gesund. When one of the anticipation before the Farbrengen began, we say on Pesach, Ilu kirvonu lufnei ha'asinai v'lo nasan lanu es ha'Torah dayenu. The anticipation and the as the crowd grew, the Olam didn't come. If the Farbrengen was at 9:30, hardly anyone came after 9 p.m. A few people came. So in other words, the Olam was already there by and large by 9 o'clock, a half hour before. Now this I don't remember. This certainly Rabbi Duchman and Rabbi Blesofksy certainly remember that in the days before the Indoor Clean Air Act, people used to smoke. But at 9 o'clock, Rabbi Eliyahu Simpson used to bang on the table and say,
What's that, 9 o'clock, 9:20?
"Not what? Not earlier." He's saying, "Off and smoking."
The Rebbe geht bald allein mit dem smoking.
It looked like everyone stopped their smoking because when the Rebbe came, it should be already clear. But in later years, they weren't smoking then. But on a Shabbos, people were still making kiddush and this and that. In the later years, the nuns that I do represent, people were sitting already from Friday night for Shabbos morning in their places of the Farbrengen. The whole part of the shul to the Rebbe's left. The Rebbe's right still had to be set up like the davening. But even then, people were standing there to make sure they have the places. There were benches for orchim, especially in the big Farbrengens. It was expanded a little bit, depending on the Yom Pager. The biggest Farbrengen ever, in terms of downstairs in 770, as a Farbrengen, was Yud Shevat Tofshin Mem. That was wall to wall, literally. There was people at both walls of 770. It was the only time in history.
And outside, people outside.
Our people were outside also. But by a Farbrengen, that was the biggest crowd ever.
So it's interesting. The later years, we know the Rebbe would Farbring every Shabbos. After Chabi Shvat, the Rebbe since Sistalkus, Rabbi Blesofksy, if you can tell us, when you were a youngster, a young bacher, how do you know when the Rebbe would Farbring? How often would the Rebbe Farbring?
But Mevarchim was a given. The Rebbe Farbrengen Mevarchim. If also by Yom Pager, before or after Yom Pager, we expected, sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. And there was a notification. Very few times we found out after davening. 95% of the time we knew before davening that today did the Farbrengen. And sometimes even knew about it before Shabbos because the Rebbe would tell a guest not to go back to where he came from because he's Farbrengen Shabbos. But normally it was known already Shabbos in the morning before the Rebbe came to daven that he's going to be Farbrengen. Especially later with the Rashi Sikhs, the Rebbe would notify to Yossi Waldman, or first it was Duchman, Sholom's Zayde. But later that changed for a certain episode that happened. And Yossi Waldman was informed that this is the Sikh. If the Rebbe gave a Rashi Sikh, that means you can be Farbrengen.
He would stand downstairs when the Rebbe came into shul, the back door where the invitations hang on the wall, he would stand there. And the Rebbe was already wearing talis and tefillin. And the Rebbe, talis, not tefillin. We're talking about Shabbos now.
Can you say who you're talking about?
Well, Rabbi
Waldman.
Blesofksy mentioned somebody called Rabbi Yosef Waldman. He lived in the Shkuna here.
Sholom.
Sholom. And he had a koch in the Rashi Sikhs for whatever reason. In the earlier years, he used to even write into the Rebbe a lot. He used to give in a note. Would the Rebbe be so kind as to tell us which Rashi is going to discuss? The people should learn it and be well versed in this Rashi. But and for whatever this is, I'm talking about even in Memches. I'm talking about as late as Memches, that he would stand by that spot, and especially on a Shabbos when you didn't know if there's going to be a Farbrengen or not, and when the Rebbe would just stop for a split second by him and turn to him and tell him, this. So you knew there's going to be a Farbrengen today. If the Rebbe stopped by him for a second and said something, and then the Rebbe would keep walking, and he would say what the Rebbe said, and some people around him would have already heard also. The Rebbe said, Pedek this, Pasuk this, Dibra Maschil this. And then from that, people, you had runners who were running down to Troy Avenue to the different shuls, say Farbrengen, people would scream in the streets, so they knew at 10 o'clock, 10:15 in the morning, the people who davened in the shuls around Crown Heights should know to come to the Farbrengen, that it'll be at 1:30.
Now, if I can add to that, so this Yid, Rebbe Yosef Waldman, was the one that after Tafshin Chav Hei, and the Rebbe went through the entire year by explaining the Rashi, the first Rashi and the last Rashi in the Parsha, from Neach to Bereshis Tafshin Chav Vav, the Rebbe stopped. It was basically done for the year. And this guy Waldman wrote into the Rebbe and asked and begged that the Rebbe should continue this holy minhag of explaining a Rashi. On a Mishpatim, Tafshin Chavav, is when the Rebbe reintroduced this Rashi. Now, in the early mems, Waldman would if he didn't hear from the Rebbe before Shabbos, he would stand upstairs in Gan Eden Tachten. I hope I didn't say anything wrong.
No. So just,
But the Rebbe would come into davening, and by Label Groner, Oliver Sholom, was standing at the beam, right, the first beams behind, in the front of 770. And the Rebbe would look at him and say, Farbrengen. Or the Rebbe would not look at him, and there wouldn't be a Farbrengen usually. And in the Lameds, there were times where they would announce Mincha. The last announcement on Shabbos was Mincha. What time is Mincha going to be? And there were times where the Rebbe turned around at the end of the announcement and didn't wait for the announcement for Mincha, because Mincha was always after Farbrengen, and that was the sign.
And he started walking out.
And the Rebbe walk out. And then you know that the
Farbrengen
Farbrengen is coming, and it was very little time because it was between davening and 1:30. Rabbi Duchman.
No, I just wanted to say that thought about Mincha.
Oh.
That's the thing. And also until Chavtas, until Tafshin Chavtas, Sholom Yisrael is also after Chavav. Sholom Yisrael used to stand in Gan Eden Tachten, and the Rebbe used to come in the morning, Shabbos morning, and the Rebbe would tell Sholom Yisrael Chatakov about which Rashi he will speak about. That was from Chavav till Chavtas.
That's Rabbi Charakov's son, those Angezun.
Rabbi Charakov's son. And unfortunately, there was a story that I'm sure everybody knows, Tafshin Chavtas, that somebody came down and made the announcement, and that's when that stopped.
The story that Rabbi Duchman was referring to, someone gave a fake Rashi. Someone made up a story, and the Rebbe was very, 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 whatever it is, it's hard for us to describe what the Rebbe's emotion was, but he certainly was not happy, and certainly not. It took a lot of tshuva and on the part of a lot of people and things, and the Rebbe actually the next week did talk about that Rashi because for whatever reason, the Rashi shouldn't say. Yeah, they were there with the story. I only heard the story.
But now we're talking about Farbrengen, it's not about stories.
I want to add, when the Rebbe came into the Farbrengens in the weekday, the big Farbrengens, Yud Kislev, Yud Shevat, before Lamed Ches, the Rebbe would also begin the Farbrengen by saying L'chaim and Mezenis. Mezenis, also 2 pieces of cake in the weekday as well. And the Rebbe would begin the Farbrengen by L'chaim, Mezenis, and Niggin. And after Lamed Ches, it seems that the Rebbe was conserving the time. There were many more Farbrengens after Lamed Ches, but the times of the Farbrengens were somewhat a little shorter. So if the Yud Kislev Farbrengen could have lasted for, let's say, 6 hours, after Lamed Ches, it was 4.5, 5 hours. And the Rebbe eliminated certain things, and that was one of them. I do not believe there was even one time after Lamed Ches where in the weekday Farbrengen, the Rebbe started with as Rabbi Feller was saying, the Rebbe started with L'chaim, with the wine and the cake. It was before Lamed Ches, so you see from Yud Kislev and Yud Shevat Lamed Beis, for example, Rebbe comes into the Farbrengen and starts assigning the cake, and he cleans out the becher, and etc. It's interesting because on Shabbos, of course, it was always started with the wine and the mezenos and the niggin.
Rabbi Duchman, was there and besides for the Rebbe giving Rabbi Waldman the Maramakim for the Rashi who will be addressing at the Farbrengen, was there a simon in regards to Hu Lekenu? If the Rebbe would be Ma'ided Hu Lekenu, would be a.
Sometimes, I don't know.
Can you talk about that for a moment?
I don't know if it was always, not always when the Rebbe said to sing, supposedly
They
it was the
can't
simon.
hear you.
That was,
When somebody said
that was left to interpretation.
subject interpretation, right, Harry? Als ik niet gered, zeg maar, dat met die zungen hoor ik geen bekrouw is always, it
Except,
depends what.
except this time.
When we were Bachrim Chavtas and Lamed in Newark, starting from Sunday, this Shabbos for sure is going to be a Farbrengen. That's the way it started with Dan Haga. The fights with Dan Haga started the whole week. That was those that this Shabbos for sure to be Farbrengen, sure to be a Farbrengen, sure to be Farbrengen. So there was always the anticipation, the waiting, the hoping that there's going to be a Farbrengen, trying to find every simon that's possible that will be a Farbrengen. Like you say, until hopefully that the Rebbe is not going to say Mincha, the Rebbe is going to work out to be a Farbrengen.
Which in a similar vein, during the week, when it was a Yom Pagre, when it wasn't a set Farbrengen, besides when you knew it was above Tishrei, and Yud Kislev and Yud Shevat and Purim and Yud B'Tammuz, when those were given Farbrengens, but other ones, sometimes yes, sometimes not, the Rebbe usually went to the oil in those days. And when he came out to Mincha and Maidev, he would come out upstairs to Beis Medrash, if he was still wearing the silk kapota, you knew there was a 99%, it was 99 point something, it wasn't 100%, it was once or twice that he didn't, but that was 99% that is going to be a Farbrengen when he still had on the Zaydin kapota for Mincha. When he came in for Mincha and he had changed out of the Zaydin kapota to the woolen kapota, then all bets were off, although there was, I believe, an exception to that rule too. It might have happened the other way also. Additionally, you know that the Rebbe wore during the week the woolen kapot until Tov Shanun and Cheshvan, when the Rebbe started to wear only Zayd the whole time.
Yeah, there were other simonim. For example, the Rebbe would go home on Friday night late, like davening would finish maybe 6 o'clock. The Rebbe went home between 8:30 and maybe even 9:30. In the later Friday nights, if the Rebbe went home quite late, that could have been another sign that there might be a Farbrengen tomorrow.
But not
Yeah, no.
wasn't
Right. There was no real sign. Nobody knew. There was no predictions really. The predictions was that Yud Kislev and Yud Shevat, Purim, and later years Yud Alf Nissen, Yud Beis Tammuz, Chav Av, Vav Tishrei, there's going to be a Farbrengen. That you knew. Otherwise, you knew nothing.
Were there any times besides for those set dates, Rabbi Lou, that you just mentioned, that the Rebbe surprisingly Farbrengen?
Was there any times what?
Surprise Farbrengen?
I'm asking Rabbi Lou, if in continuation what you were saying, that there were set times that the Rebbe would Farbrengen every year, like you said, Vav Tishrei, in Yud Shevat, in Chafov, Beis Tammuz. Were there times when there were surprise Farbrengens where you were just, middle of the day and you heard the Rebbe's going to Farbrengen tonight?
There were many surprise Farbrengens, and two very memorable ones was one in Tafshin Chav Ches on Yud Tes Tammuz in the middle of the day. The Rebbe Farbrengen, and it was like a sudden surprise. There were others that were not expected, but a day before or so, the Rebbe would announce it. And then in Chav Tevis Tafshin Mem Hey was probably the wildest one. The Rebbe, after Ma'ariv, said he's coming down now to the Farbrengen. And the Rebbe came down 7 minutes later, and they just begosh him, he couldn't fit. Couldn't do
Gimel
anything.
Slichas Chavtas was a very surprise for
Gimel Slichas. Was that a
I saw
Farbrengen?
the Batavis, Lamed Beis, now with 50 years. We were in Ocean Parkway then. The beer was in the middle of giving a share. For some
You
reason,
mean
I had.
Chavdalah tables?
Chavdalah tapes, not Chavdalah tapes. Chavdalah tapes,
Not
Ocean
with the
Beis.
Alter Rebbe's name?
For some, the Rebbe said the Mayim of the Rebbe's speaking. That's correct. I wasn't there then, but we were here. We were in the middle of a share from the beer in Ocean Parkway. Punkt, I had my father's chicken truck with me. So punkt, I was able, I don't know why, but some reason, and we got a telephone call in Ocean Parkway that is a Farbrengen, and we came running. The beer was with us. Passed every single light, every single thing. We made it like in 12 minutes from Ocean Parkway to 770 to the Farbrengen.
Chav Tevis Mem Hey was, some people thought maybe there was never a Farbrengen before on that day. So it was so surprising, there was not even a Zaynus on the table. And they had like cookies, like hard cookies from the Rebbe's room. And the Rebbe himself began the Farbrengen by saying that the Rambam was known as a big Mesuder. Everything was in Seder. And all of a sudden over here, we're celebrating the Rambam's yahrzeit with a not Bilti Seder. That's how the Rebbe began the Farbrengen. So there were lots of, and there were a lot of very memorable, interesting surprise Farbrengens throughout the years. Yud Aleph Nissen Lamed Aleph was a surprise Farbrengen.
After Shavuos, nun alles.
Shabbos.
Shabbos after, Nasi, it was two
Second
Farbrengen.
Farbrengen.
Second Farbrengen. Kishbrach and everything.
So Rabbi Duchman, this is in regards to the Farbrengens themselves. It's interesting to know that in preparation to the Farbrengens, there were hachanas. If I'm not mistaken, Bachram used to go to mikveh, the Galite would put on their kapatas. Can you give us sort of the preparation to standing, waiting for the Rebbe to come into the Farbrengen and the hachanas to the Farbrengen? And that's, again, another thing is getting the place. Can you describe that Avira?
What do you want to fight about? What do you want to talk about? The fights? What do you want to talk about? The fights, the chazakas. What?
The preparation for the
With
Farbrengen.
preparations, okay, to make sure that you're rested. I mean, the Farbrengen was a very, very tense. It was a very, very tense time, especially for Bachram. You had to concentrate, be focused and concentrate for hours. Something that Bachram usually are not accustomed to.
Pre-ADD days.
Yeah, even the pre-ADD days. All right. Anyway, so it was Pasha Duchman, and so it was Pasha very, very. First of all, to hear every single word from the Rebbe, to be able to connect to the Rebbe, to follow the Rebbe. So it was a very tense, very difficult time. So first of all, Pashat Begashmius, Bachram of course tried, but of course there was the Hachane Ruchnis, like you said, going to the mikveh and v'churu. Every single person on his own way. I mean, I can't think of a uniformed way to remember the Farbrengens. The uniformed way was to listen to every word, to try to and to be focused. And again, this was the to walk out and to know exactly what the Rebbe said, and to be in tune with what the Rebbe said.
Thank you for sharing that.
I can say that there was an excitement before basically every Farbrengen, because the Rebbe was going to come in, sit for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and there was going to be Chidush Torah and who knows what. But there were certain Farbrengens where there was a tremendous excitement. Yud Aleph Nissen was always a very exciting, the new niggin, and the people, it was like Erev Pesach Offenveld, there was just a lot of very beautiful feelings. But the Eibishter, thank the Eibishter for the Rebbe's Gesund, etc. I also know that before the Purim Farbrengens, some of the elder Hasidim would come in with mashke, and they would get happy before the Farbrengen itself. I remember Rebbe Lechaim and a few others. Smile. Yeah. They would come in about 7:30, 2 hours before the Farbrengen, and they would sit down and then start enjoying Purim. On Motzei Purim, a lot of the Bachrim had been out Mivtza, and they were just trying to catch themselves a breath or two. But there was also excitement because Purim was Purim many years, either in the Sichos, the way the Rebbe spoke, or there was some major Giluyim and in the Nigunim or L'chaim, and Purim Tashachai, we all know, Purim Chavav, when the Rebbe was called up, Yad Nesim, Purim Mem Beis, and etc. There were many years that at the Purim Farbrengen, I must say there were other years that the Purim Farbrengen was not any different than a regular Farbrengen, but many of the years on Purim. Also, Leil Simchas Torah was a very unusual Farbrengen because everybody was out in different shuls. But I personally was working in the Sichos, and so I was always there when the Rebbe came in at 9 o'clock to this Farbrengen, also a unique time, at 9 p.m. And when the Rebbe came in, one can see the Rebbe walking from the door. There was like hardly anybody there. That was a pin drop even in the later years. It was just like very quiet, and the Rebbe just came in, but you saw the Rebbe walking because there was no big bleachers. There was just no one there. That was also very unique. Leil Simchas Torah.
I'll include you to one Farbrengen that I don't think very, very few people that were there, especially today, and that's the Farbrengen that was the second night Pesach after upstairs. I remember very clear the Farbrengens of Ches, of Tes. Adi, you were there? You were by the Farbrengens? Oh, yeah, you were already here. Nice. Okay, that was a very, very interesting, unique Farbrengen. What? Only the Rebbe's I got that was on the table, nothing else. A watch, napkins. No, napkins were there. I don't remember. Anyway, but 3/4 of the place was asleep. The Rebbe downstairs in the regular place, the Farbrengen. The Rebbe would talk. Mamish, the Rebbe would not look at the Aharon. The Rebbe sat the whole time, almost the whole time, just looking down and speaking. One time even there was a mimer. So that was also very, very interesting, unique, different Farbrengen. There was a few Farbrengens that were without L'chaims, of course, that being one of them. Also the Farbrengens that were in the Sukkah, Lamed Gimel. What'd you say?
Lamed Aleph, yeah.
Lamed Aleph, yeah.
Were Farbrengens downstairs, time Farbrengens.
Hi, good.
The Rebbe one time wrote in a zettel after he stopped taking yichidus that the yichidus now, if I'm not mistaken, is in a Farbrengen. Those who want. The Rebbe said that the Farbrengens, that yichidus now is in the Farbrengen. Did you ever see, may I ask Rabbi Duchman, or did you know of other Bachrim that felt that the Rebbe answered them b'shas Farbrengens? Things that they were going through, and that did you ever have experience that you felt that Rebbe was talking to you?
Not as Bachram, as Igelite, of course.
Yigaleit also.
Of course. Certain things, certain clarity, of course.
Rabbi Lou, anything to add?
I did experience that in a very strong way in the year of Toshim and Gimel. I was struggling with a couple of things, and I did not even write into the Rebbe, but the Rebbe for about 6 or 7 weeks was basically at every one of the Farbrengens was Mamish talking to me. Of course, he wasn't talking to me personally, but I got tremendous amount of advice and hadracha during that time. Until Purim, Tavshin Mem Gimel. I will write that up for this coming Purim. Yes, that whole thing.
So we're talking the whole time about when the Rebbe came into Farbrengen. I want to bring out the personal feeling, I'm sure was with everybody else over here. After Farbrengen, Shabbos, Fat, we went outside. We were so in the tour of Iberleben was that we went outside. We saw the car that Eastern Parkway. It was to us was like, what's going on over here? We just walked out of a place that was Kuli Kaddish. Mufshit got me from Yonim Gashmi. He came to the street. It was like a bucket of cold water, or hot water, whichever you wanted. The ruach, it felt that everybody, any normal bacher, any normal Yigaman, was affected by being by the Farbrengen. Was he listened a lot? Was he listened to the Nigunim only? But the Farbrengen had a pull on just being there. That when you walked out, the world was like, what's going on over here?
I want to add, because that is mamish the feeling. I remember it was Shabbos Pinchas or Matas Masei Tavshim Mem Zayin, and that exact thing happened to me. The Rebbe was talking to them by Hilchas Beis Avachira and all the different things. It was just a very uplifting Farbrengen, and I walked out and I just like my eyes like where am I? Just a second or two to readjust to real life. You were in the Rebbe's world when you at the Rebbe's Farbrengen, and
I would just like to pause for a second and just mention today's sponsor is Il Nishmas Hatamim Shmuel Olva Sholom Beni Bodel Chaim Tevim Harabatamim Asher Karnofsky. May his neshama have an aliyah, and all of us who are benefiting from this event, may it be a nechama for the whole family.
Amen.
I would just like to continue now onto another theme. Rabbi, you want to add something?
I was going to say this earlier. I just wanted to add a small thing. You're talking about the anticipation of the Rebbe coming in. So there was when everyone stood up, you knew that now now is like Matan Torah. Till then was the anticipation, and now it's happening. And the Rebbe came in always. Behind the Rebbe was Rebbe Charakov, always came in after the Rebbe. And standing on the podium where the Rebbe Farbreng was always Reb Sholom's father, Unzal Tzlangayor. And he always had His name was Rabbi Duchman, and he had a wooden folding chair in his hand, folded up. And if you want to see that chair one day, if you ever get a chance, they open up once in a while. The Maskiris, the Cheder Maskiris, the Americans upstairs, the chair is still there. You could see it. And as soon as the Rebbe passed him, he would put down the chair for Rabbi Charakov, who didn't sit with his feet under the table, but he sat next to the table facing the Rebbe, as you've seen in pictures. Another thing is, just one Nekudim, there were Shabbos, it was always like this, and later, until they started giving out radios with simultaneous translation, people didn't understand Farbrengen and sat for hours, and you didn't feel bored. You openly felt that your neshama was being addressed. Even I remember as a child when I certainly didn't understand, I only understood intermittent words. But when the Rebbe was talking, you felt that there's a hashpah happening now in the world. There's nobody felt Tzarli Hamokim or it was just some. Now when we got older as a Bachar, we started to understand the Sichas, it was the Gan Eden Mamish. And I'm talking about people who didn't understand Yiddish and understand that I was speaking the words, but just sitting there and being there in the Daled Ames was a Yisroimus, which is not easily describable, but nevertheless, it's something like we said at the outset that we could relive and live.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Feller. Throughout the years, we know, throughout the decades, as this panel represents, there were different themes throughout, so to say, throughout the Rebbe's Nesius. Some say early in the Yud, the Chavs was more Shlichus. Some people say in the Chavs was more Rav and Talmud. There was the Rashi Sichas, and there were deeper Sichas, and there was the Memorim a little deeper. And in the Lamids, we know, was the Mivtza era. That's when the Rebbe launched most of Mivtzaim, besides for Mivtza Tzilin, Chav Zayin, during the 6-day war. But I want to ask Rabbi Duchman, in that Tekufa, in Tafshin, when you were Bachar, Tafshin Lamed Daled and Lamed Hey, there was a few months that there was non-stop Farbrengens. Every other opportunity the Rebbe was sort of made another opportunity to Farbring. Can you kind of bring us into 770? Tafshin Lamed Daled, Lamed Hey, and to the Avirah then?
If I could bring myself, I would pay anything to bring myself back to the Avirah. There was Pashut in Avirah that if something that if the Rebbe says something, there has to be action. There has to be execution. It can't be such a thing that the Rebbe should speak about it and that the Rebbe should say something and there shouldn't be something that should come into Pil Mamish into execution. And the Rebbe spoke tremendously about the Mivtzoyim. The Rebbe then was read after the story with Marot. The Rebbe spoke about the Mivtzoyim, and Bochrim sat together with the David, with Yoseda, Olav Sholom, continuously thinking what we could do, how we could bring out the Rebbe's message to the masses, how we could bring into action what the Rebbe wants. The Rebbe is not speaking stam. The Rebbe, it's a call to action. And Baruch Hashem, we did a little bit, and the Rebbe said Mefeirish that this is that he wanted to give Idut, and he wants to that we should, and it went this way and this way. Baruch Hashem.
Was there an expression from the Rebbe about a mullah or its Molim Farbrengens?
Mullah and Farbrengens is Savaya. The Rebbe said Sukkot Lamedalet.
What can you give it the background? What
it was during the Yom Kippur Muhammad. It was a very, very tense, very, very tense time in the world. And there was a surprise Farbrengen the second day. The Sukkot, there was no Sukkah. And the Rebbe, there was a Farbrengen, I think, on the second day Sukkot, and I think on Shabbos. What? Second night Sukkot, yeah. Second night Sukkot. There was a Farbrengen, and on Shabbos. And the Rebbe then hat sich sehr stark gekocht when he gave the Simcha. And the Rebbe said that there should be Farbrengens, and should Farbrengen every single night of Sukkot. Bizes and sein no morgen ha'eretz Farbrengen is the Savaya. That will be the whole time will be Farbrengens. I remember the Farbrengens in 770. I remember it was that sukkah versteht sich of the Rebbe month Farbrengens, so everybody can imagine the pouring that was there. It was gegossen. Weißt das, what? That was a famous sattel. With Zilberstamm was the famous sattel. There was a Farbrengen together with Gezeda, with Rabbi, with Mendel Futterfass, and in the sukkah. It was pouring so that Pasha couldn't sit in the sukkah. So he went inside. The Mendel was sitting, so it was a very, very interesting, very, very special Farbrengen. We'll leave it at that.
Oh. Rabbi Blesofksy.
This is a Farbrengen of Chassidim, not Farbrengen of the Rebbe. That's just to make that clear.
In addition to the sichos, of course, in the Divrei Torah, which the Rebbe would share with Klal Yisrael during the Farbrengens, there was, of course, the aspect of Nigunim. And I've been told by many people that those who couldn't necessarily, hold up with the Rebbe in regarding to the sichos, at least by the Nigunim, not at least, but by the Nigunim, they recharged, they got back into it. Can you describe one or two episodes that stand out by you, Nigunim by the Rebbe's Farbrengen, that had a strong impact on you personally?
One, the first word that comes to my mind, Mr. Sholom remembers it also.
When the Rebbe came in.
You mean
When
after
Rebbe came in, didn't sing.
You mean after
That was
Kiddush?
later. Talking about a song, especially, the Rebbe spoke about the Tzemach Tzedek's mother, that she gave her life away for the Alter Rebbe. So after that sikha, they sang the Staatsgesnigen, and the Rebbe turned pale, and they stopped singing it, and they went to a more freilige nigen. The next Farbrengen, the Rebbe asked for the nigen. That was one asked for the nigen, where the Rebbe it affected the Rebbe very much. Bechlal, as I said before, in the years that I remember in the Chofs, the Rebbe came in, said L'chaim, it was very quiet, very malchusdik. And this was starting to go the slow type of nigunim, these type of nigunim.
Who started them?
Rabbi.
They always started the first nigunim.
This is one of them. Till Chavdallah was Shmuel, he used to get up and start a nigging. He always got up. He stood next to Yale. Yale used to be on the Rebbe's left side. Till that sikha, where the Rebbe told him he should go to the Talmidim.
The first one, afterwards,
He's a Heshkia or Yale. Once in a while, Mendel Baumgarten. Yeah.
It was his job. It was Heske's job, and Mendel Baumgarten was a substitute, or Eli Lipsker.
Maybe they don't know, but they made a vad. They made a vad from the good. He was Ches, they made a vad.
Touching the Ches.
He made a vad.
Aharon, you said there were two episodes. What was the second that stands out?
Understands that with the Nigunim.
I think it was when Shmuel B'Tzalel Altis came.
That's an interesting story. That happened the Yitzchak Zayinuch of Ches. Shmuel B'Tzalel Altis is a chassid that lived in Melbourne, Australia. He's originally from Nikolaev. It was Mishpachta, was Mekuruv to Beis Harav. He was Chassidish Neshama. He was big menagen. I don't know if he expected to be here for Shabbos because I don't know. He was wearing a suit, quite a light color, a gray suit, but a Farbrengen, and a gray hat, but a big fat black artel. After the second or third sikha, the Rebbe finished. He didn't get a coup from the Rebbe. I was there with the small elam. He started. He got up behind the Rabbi, who was sitting to the Rebbe's right on the bench, and he put his fingers in his thumb. He closed his eyes. He sang a niggin Avalach that's the Rebbe Zayd is niggin. And the Rebbe did something then out of character, meaning something the Rebbe only did twice a year. The Rebbe always sat at the edge of the chair with his elbows on the armrests. Shabbos Bereshis with his older mitzvahs, or Shabbos Pashas Mishpatim, when Yechon Gordon would tell a story, and later on with Shimon Goldman, that would sit back in the chair, would lean back. when Shmuel Salov sang this nigun, the Rebbe did the same thing. He sat back in the chair, and the Rebbe had a look of like he's going back. I mean, the Rebbe's word I can't read, but it looked like the Rebbe was enjoying it immensely. He sang a balach, and the Elam didn't know it. So basically, he sang the whole nigun by himself.
Which nigga was it?
Yeah, you do, you do, I do.
So the Rebbe leaned back and like,
That's the Rebbe's Zayda's niggun.
What?
There was one nigga live, though.
Yeah. Chav Dalet Teves Tavshin Chav Gimel, the Rebbe asked to sing all the nigunim of the Alter Rebbe, the 10 nigunim. And after each sikha, they were singing a different nigun, and the nigunim became a little bit more uncommon. And at one point, the Rebbe says, "No, Shenal 10. Have you got all of the 10?" This was already on the third Farbrengen. It was a Farbrengen on Shabbos, then on Motzei Shabbos, and then on Sunday night. On Sunday, the Rebbe wanted them to finish all of the nigunim of the Alter Rebbe. That was also very unique regarding nigunim. Another interesting thing about nigunim was in Yud Gimel Tishrei Tavshin Lamed Ches, the last Farbrengen before Shmini Atzeres of Lamed Ches, and the Rebbe came into the Farbrengen, and the Rebbe instructed to sing 8 nigunim at the beginning of the Farbrengen. And usually, for whatever reason, the nigunim that the Rebbe asked to sing were always at the end of the Farbrengen. Occasionally, the Rebbe would, like the Gimel Tishrei, the Rebbe would ask to sing the Rebbe Marash's nigun to begin the Farbrengen on a rare occasion. But this was really, really highly unusual, part of the unusual lead up to Shmini Atzeres Lamed Ches.
Rabbi Lou, we mentioned earlier about, and he should be mentioned, Rabbi Sholom, which every year he would be mishtatif in the Kinnis Atmimim, which is going on now. So I would just like to mention the Rabbi Sholom and the contribution which he gave to Avad throughout the years. And in regards to the Farbrengen, I was told once that Rabbi was the person who kind of set the tone of the Farbrengen. He managed the Farbrengen. Could you discuss with them, Rabbi Lou or Rabbi Feller, if you're already talking?
He started the nigunim that the Rebbe wanted. In other words, that wasn't the other people from the Vad, that wasn't Heske Gazruger. If the Rebbe wanted a certain nigun started, Rabbi Yael started it. Also, there's one on video that Rebbe sent him to ask a guy who was taking pictures if he said chitas or not. Additionally, of course, there was always a great decor in the Rebbe's Farbrengen. I was mentioning this today to somebody. Today, it's hard for us to understand in any event that everyone should sit quietly and listen to one person. But there was people of all ages, from age 5. If a kid was there, he was a kid who was quiet. There was no kids even making trouble. And other people whose kids were in shaykhs didn't come. But there was some kids came and they sat. And people who were 90, everyone sat listening to the Rebbe Miktanon Bagdeilam. And it was tense, it was tense in the room, and it was a total decorum. And in the thing, if somebody was outside, it's a different story. Whatever it was, that's a different thing. But inside, in the Rebbe's Farbrengen, there was total a total bittul, a submission to the Farbrengen and to being in the presence of the Rebbe and to listening to the Rebbe. That's what it was all about.
Rabbi Lou, we're talking here about the Farbrengens themselves, but maybe it doesn't get so much emphasis on the preparation that the Rebbe himself made for the Farbrengen. The Rebbe spoke Sichos and Pirkei Avos and Zeir and Rashi and Hadronim and in Yonah Yoma, and the list goes on and on. Do you recall ever hearing something in regards to the Rebbe himself, how he prepares for Farbrengen, or how he's matriach himself to give over the Eibush Dvar Hashem?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. There is very little that we know about this. There were times where the Rebbe would say something and the Rebbe didn't finish it. He was relying on the next Farbrengen. And the questions would be asked by the people who were writing the sichos, like, what did the Rebbe mean? The Rebbe would say, I haven't, wait till after Shabbos or something. On Erev Rosh Hashanah Tavshin Mendel, the end of Mendel, so it was Erev Shana Mem Hey, Chavtes Elul Mem Daled. The Rebbe was answering some questions that had been asked about something the Rebbe said a week or two before. It had to do with smicha and the continuation with smicha. This Farbrengen you can hear on the tape, or there might even be a video of this. And the Rebbe then said that he prepares to Farbreng a certain nekudas. He puts together, the Rebbe said this, that he prepares himself by preparing points to say. And sometimes, mitzad nevius hamoichin, because the mind keeps on running, you can sometimes fall into a different subject or introduce a different subject and not go through all of the details and how they fit with the previous subject. And that can lead to questions. And the Rebbe said, instead of listening to my words, follow the context, because this was obviously not something that I prepared to say before the Farbrengen. It was something that came up during the speaking of the Farbrengen. So we got a little glimpse into that. And we previously said, when we get to the Rashi, that if we get to the Farbrengen on Shabbos, and if the Rebbe stayed a little longer on Friday night, it was thought that could lead to a Farbrengen. In other words, the Rebbe was, I guess, preparing. We know very little about the preparations of the Rebbe to the Farbrengen. Rabbi Blesofksy reminded me that my grandfather was in Yechidus, my grandfather Zalman Jaffe, who had a unique relationship with the Rebbe, and he was in Yechidus once, and he asked the Rebbe about Farbrengen that Shabbos. It was Bahaloischa, I think, Chav Zayin, or a Shabbos that didn't really necessarily deserve a Farbrengen, if you will. It wasn't any special date or any special time. And the Rebbe said to my grandfather, it takes a long time to prepare for Farbrengen. It's a lot of work. So my grandfather says, it's okay. Usually you speak for a half hour and we sing the niggin for 5-10 minutes. We'll sing for a half hour and then we'll speak for 5-10 minutes and then we'll resolve that. So the Rebbe said, it takes longer for 5-10 minutes than a half hour. I think my grandfather actually wrote that in the book. I don't think the Rebbe answered that. It just happens to be that Shabbos was, if Farbrengen went on for 5 hours with all kinds of questions. There was, all kinds of questions in the Rashis and so on and so forth.
Additionally, we used to see once in a while, people say that they never spoke without the, notes, etc. So that's accurate to the extent that the Rebbe didn't have notes in front of him. But once in a while, between siches, you would see the Rebbe pull something out and put it back inside. Later, after Gimel, on the back of the Siddur, after Gimel Tammuz, we actually did discover several of these tzetlach, and they've been printed and published, where the Rebbe literally has a word which is denoting a 45-minute sicha, a word or 2 words or 3 words, and the several nekudas, and sometimes they found the Farbrengen and Lamar Be'apella, 2 of the things, let's say, they don't see anywhere in the Farbrengen or something like that. But the Rebbe certainly jotted himself down bullet points for Farbrengen, which we found later.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
In many of the years, and including to the children's rallies even, and not just the Farbrengens. A sicha on a fast day or something.
So my next question is, I guess, to Rabbi Lou. Throughout the years of Rebbe's Nesias, we find very often that there were times that the Rebbe wasn't so happy with Chassidim's conduct during the Farbrengens, or even worse, like the Rebbe sometimes even had to close his eyes not to see people yawn. Does anything come to mind how much the Rebbe invested in the Farbrengen, that if there was any disturbance, the Rebbe took it personal in a way?
all kinds of things. For Tashin Chav Hey, the Rebbe was Farbrengen every Shabbos, and the Rebbe was complaining that people were sitting there, they weren't used to this. We're sitting every single Shabbos afternoon at the Farbrengen, and people were sleeping. So Shabbos Chayesara, they took out all the benches, and so you could, if you didn't sit, you weren't going to sleep. And the Rebbe walks in, expecting everybody to sit down, and nobody's sitting down. And the Rebbe expressed himself quite in a disappointed manner. And
So,
You
yeah.
might-
Heads flew
Never
from the
mind,
Bada
Rashi.
Masada then. Let's just put it that way. The Rebbe changed around the Bada Masada at that time.
that's one
The
example.
Rebbe used to use an Oishbrach. You make Jews tired, they take away their after Shabbos afternoon nap. Which the Rebbe used to sometimes say it in humor, sometimes in jest, and sometimes in seriousness. That it was something that was bothering him, that, people were not listening properly.
I remember the Farbrengen of, it was either Leil Simchas Torah or the second Farbrengen of Shabbos Bereshis, Tavshin Mem Aleph. And in the middle of the Sikha, just in the middle of anything, the Rebbe said like this: there's a shakla tarya in halacha. If somebody bites their nails, if you have to wash nagavas, because in Shulchan Aruch it says that when you cut your nails, you need to wash nagavasa. We all know that. But what about biting the nails? Is that considered cutting them, or is that considered just like eating them or biting them? Then the Rebbe said, Al Kaponim, Shabbos and Yom Tov, we don't bite the nails at all. That was one time. Another time, I remember the Rebbe say to somebody, "Gay Vash the hand," who was
During the Farbrengen?
during the Farbrengen in the middle of the Sikha. So that was when they get to either biting the nails or cutting, or he might have scratched. I don't know what the person did. I wasn't looking at the person.
Tell me, till Jacobson,
I don't remember these stories.
till the book stop touching the chandelier. Middle of Sikha.
Go ahead.
Could you say that on the mic?
I wasn't there.
Once in the middle of a Sikha, the Rebbe turned around to Jacobson, told him to tell the Bacher that it's the chandelier is Muktzah Shabbos.
Wow. Chandelier is Muktzah on Shabbos.
Yeah, touching the chandelier. There was all kinds of things. And of course, there was some complaints about people who were not paying attention properly. I remember a particular one of the sharpest sikhs I've ever heard was on Shabbos Miketz Tavshin Mem Daled, Shabbos Chanukah. And then Shabbos Vayeshev was a long Farbrengen, the first part of the Farbrengen. Then the Rebbe rushed the second part of the Farbrengen very quickly. He only asked the questions on the Rashi and on the Zohar, and the Rebbe wrapped up the Farbrengen, and the Rebbe said that next week there'll be the answers to this question. And so I was working then also in the Ha'aretz of Yehudim and Ola Torah, and some answers came. People suggested the answers, but we decided not to publish any of them because the Rebbe said he's going to answer it himself. And on that Shabbos, the Rebbe said, it's a custom to learn a Rashi, and also when we can live in Shuldik, we're still from the previous, from last week. And then the Rebbe got into something that was very, very, very sharp. The Rebbe spoke very low. The Rebbe was not screaming. The Rebbe was like on a low tone. And the Rebbe said, we're sitting over here ready for many years, decades, and there's not even one answer that was suggested by the people. Not one answer that somebody could have suggested. And what's the point of coming down here and matter and yidden and making Jews work hard? He says, I could sit in my room, and he said, the Rebbe Rashab once said that he can learn the Likutei Torah and the head and atzmos. He can feel the Eibishter. The Rebbe told the story of the train, that if you're not hooked to the engine of the train, then you're going to sit in the carriage and you're not going to go anywhere. You're not connected, in other words, to the Rebbe. And then the Rebbe said like this: next Shabbos, there will not be a Farbrengen. The Shabbos after that, which is Vayechi, there will not be a Farbrengen again. The Kumendik Shabbos Nochdem, the Shabbos after that, will also not be a Farbrengen. And then the Rebbe said, the Eibishter geholfen, that in the fourth Shabbos is Shabbos Mevorchim. To them, will man in them euch gereya sein? Do you want to do something to lessen that experience as well? Those were shocking words. And when the Rebbe asked the questions in the Rashi, the Rebbe answered them. But on Shabbos Va'era, the next time there was a Farbrengen, the Rebbe asked the questions, and he said he's leaving these questions for the people here to answer. Now, Shabbos Boy, the Rebbe said that everybody tried answering it, but why didn't you stick to the rule of Pshutei Shel Mikra? Shabbos Boy, the Rebbe asked the questions, didn't answer them, and Beshalach, the Rebbe said, you started off answering it, and then with Fafirti, you went off somewhere. Shabbos Beshalach, again, the Rebbe asked the questions. It was in today's Chitas, Mikdash Adnai Kainenu Yadechon, Rashi says, Azokiv Gadol. And the Rebbe asked the questions, and on Yisrael, the Rebbe said that he got the answers right, and that was the end of that idea of leaving behind questions so that people can answer.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Lou. Rabbi Duchman, and one of the, an aspect of the Farbrengen was, I think until perhaps Lamed Ches, you'll correct me, was sending in a bottle of mashke before Shabbos for to say l'chaim with the Rebbe. The Rebbe would give you some, and you'll explain how that process worked. Growing up, I think, especially your bar mitzvah, there were certain times that we would shtel the bottle. Can you give us a little background of that? Reb Sholom.
During the Farbrengen, by then the Gunim, especially after the Maimer. What?
After the Maimer.
After the Maimer. What did you say?
It was always after the Maimer.
I said after the Maimer. I said after the Maimer, if you had a special occasion, if you had a special occasion, like you said, a bar mitzvah, a chasana, or something.
Bris, a
special.
yard side.
Bris, yard side also?
Yeah.
More the years or later years?
Huh? I'm talking in the Chafs for sure. Man.
In Yud Shevat, you walked over to the Rebbe with the bottle.
You came over to the
Later,
Rebbe with the bottle.
you gave him
That's
the
what I said.
Mevkis on Friday.
That's exactly what I said. So I said, so you used to go over to the Rebbe with the bottle and give the Rebbe the bottle. The Rebbe would pour in the mashke. There was a few times that there was very, very different ways. If again, sometimes the Rebbe would just pour into the person the bottle. Sometimes the Rebbe would, again, in the later years, when the Rebbe made Kiddush, sometimes the Rebbe's Becher was there. So then the Rebbe would sometimes pour into his Becher and then pour into the person and give it to the person. And sometimes that the Rebbe would pour into his Becher and then take from his Becher and put it into the bottle and then give it to the person and then give the Rebbe would always say a little bit to give out over here and the rest to give out, So
I'm just picturing the bottle that the person would get back would probably look pink from the Rebbe's wine.
Sometimes
Sometimes
The Rebbe would pour wine into the bottle.
Sometimes it was like that, yeah.
Sometimes the Rebbe's Becher ended up being so filled with
Sometimes
vodka.
Rebbe's Becher,
Sorry?
I heard from Rabbi Yale, very, very interesting thing, okay? Heard from Rabbi Yale, I remember when the Rebbe spoke the Farbrengen about Benedictine, there was a time that there was one Farbrengen that the Rebbe said that he shouldn't put Benedictine on the table.
Neuer Chav Zayin.
Huh?
Neuer Chav Zayin. Mein Tisch wird es nicht so.
Rabbi Yale told me that that Shabbos, if you walked over with a bottle, he said he was a Mason Lev. If you walked over with any type of bottle to the Rebbe would pour into the person, would just pour to the person. If you brought a bottle of Benedictine that Shabbat that the Rebbe by the end of the Farbrengen said not to put Benedictine anymore, the Rebbe put it into his cup, took from his becher into the bottle and gave it out. That was different than Benedictine than all the other bottles. So
Were any of the panelists zeicha by their bar mitzvah?
Were any?
Of the four panelists here, can you describe the experience as a bar mitzvah bacher going up to the Rebbe with mashke? I guess we'll start with Rabbi Blesofksy as these.
You went up with your father and
Sorry, they can't hear.
you went up with your father, the father would, you had the bottle with you. Well, my bar mitzvah, the father gave the Rebbe a bottle. The Rebbe gave a father l'chaim, he gave me l'chaim. I don't remember if he put in his becher or not. He said l'chaim, die ungewünschten, die Shuvashatim Sachas and other things, and that was it. I'm going to change the subject, something you asked before, and before I forget. You asked if anything ever happened at Farbrengen that was interesting. One Farbrengen, in the middle of Farbrengen, two Chassidim got into a slight disagreement. It's not important who they are. They're both Sheikh Leofer, and they were sitting right in front of the Rebbe. So one, in his anger, took a bottle of wine or whatever, and the Rebbe saw the bottle flying in the air. I don't know if he meant to use it, but he meant to scare the guy. The Rebbe saw it. The Rebbe stopped the sikh in the middle. He said, "Bet him, he should stop the Farbrengen now." He is, he
Okay.
started sich, he finished sich, and the Farbrengens, and I think 10 to 3 or 10
Das war
to 3.
gemeint. Ich finde es sicher, es hat das wieder gemeint.
Ist der Rebbe Ende der Farbrengen?
Ah.
Ist der Rebbe Ende der Farbrengen,
Ja,
right?
das ist
You
Farbrengen.
didn't get your mitzvah.
I'm sure I got. He said if I remember.
I remember Shabbos Nosai Tavshin Lamed Zayin was a Shabbos before my bar mitzvah. And I went over with my father. My father had the bottle. And the Rebbe opened up the bottle, did not pour it into his becher. And I was standing, the Rebbe was sitting here. I was standing right at the table and my father was standing next to me. And I put out my hand with the cup, empty cup. And the Rebbe like sort of, no, you pointed to my father. He said, he has to get it first. And the Rebbe poured for my father, then the Rebbe poured for me. And the Rebbe said, "Zoals endigen de hachonis deine bar mitzvah in a chassidischen Eifen." And there was one other line there that I don't recall, but that I do remember those two lines.
Wow. Thank you for sharing
I
that.
was once a Killer Chabad. So the Rebbe.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually. So later when you got involved with Askanas.
I was with Shia Pinson. So, and the Rebbe weißt doch so. And so the Rebbe said to me, du hast doch a schwarze Bird, er hat a weiße Bird, and the Rebbe gave him first. But by now, the Bird, we have a weiße Bird, Hashem, so can I speak best.
So every year before the Kil Chabad dinner, you would send in a bottle of mashke before Shabbos? Rabbi Duchman.
Actually, the first dinner that I made, I did not send in a bottle of mashke. And the Rebbe was quite upset about it. The Rebbe sent Rebbe in the middle of the Farbrengens to go upstairs and to be on a bottle.
Wow.
It was after Pesach. Mem Gimel, I think, Mem Beis and Mem Gimel. And the Rebbe said, but then the Rebbe said, without betting, so we sent him.
Would the Rebbe ask the person who was making an event that week to be machers? What was like the process by the actual, after the Rebbe would say l'chaim to him?
I don't remember.
This started in Mem Vov, in that kufa, and the Rebbe also said a sikha about the mashke, which mashke to be brought up over here. It was a Shabbos Miketz Tashim Mem Vov, but the thing that people would get, not just a bottle of mashke, but it was the bottles of mashke were for events that were taking place in the near future. And then the Rebbe would say to each person by Zayin Machris and Mem Vov. People understood after that the Rebbe wanted to be Machris. So at first, people were very skeptical, very worried about saying anything at the Rebbe's Farbrengens, stop making announcements. But the Rebbe encouraged it. And what is the event? Where is the event? When is the event? What time is the event? And the Rebbe wanted protim. I remember Simcha Zerkan Sholom went up and in the earlier time, Mem Vov, Mem Zayin, and the Rebbe said, Zayin Machris. So he said, we're going to have a dinner. The Rebbe said, Vu. And the Rebbe said, when? And he gave the day, Zuntik, or Montik. And the Rebbe said, what time? Time. Vu. He said, Chaver Kadisha, which is a hall in Montreal. And everybody just burst out laughing. The Rebbe had a big smile on his face. I remember that, it was a little awkward at the beginning because you weren't sure exactly what to say. And nobody was prepared for this, I remember once going up in Nun Aleph for some kind of thing, and I'd be prepared myself for the week before what I was going to say. Even though the Rebbe was busy with other people by that point, at least you were able to prepare.
Right. This reminded me of an incident in Tafshin Mem Beis or Mem Gimel when the Yeshiva in Morristown concluded a Sefer Torah during the Rebbe's campaign, the Sefer Torah Klali, which was started in Mem Beis. Rabbi Herson got a l'chaim from the Rebbe. The Rebbe gave him a bottle of mashke, and he was machris that everyone was invited to come to the Sefer Torah in Morristown. He gave the address and the pratim. So the Rebbe called. I heard this from Rabbi Herson. Rebbe calls them back and whispers to them, "Tell them how about transportation. They're going to think they have to walk there." So he gets back up there. There'll be the buses, the backford, and so you see how particular the Rebbe was in the details, how people are actually going to get there. It was an actual event that was happening. It wasn't just in the Welter. Right? We're going to conclude the this beautiful panel in the next few minutes. Just before we conclude, I would like to ask Rabbi Lou if he perhaps remembers the Sikha of Chov Chesed Mem Aleph. The Rebbe spoke 120 years then from the Rebbe Rashab's birthday, and how that's Negeya today, especially now as we approach the Rebbe's 120th birthday on Yud Alef Nisan, Aleinu L'Teva. There was a very powerful Sikha, emotional also from the Rebbe at Farbrengens. Rabbi Lou, if you can share.
Before I share, I like always to give Hakdama. And so the Rebbe in Tavshin Lamed Ches, after the Shmini Atzeres Lamed Ches, the Rebbe spoke on Motzei Shabbos rather than Farbrengens on Shabbos for both years of Lamed Ches and Lamed Tes, with two exceptions, aside for the Yom Tovim. There was Shabbos Bamidbar, Tavshin Lamed Ches was Eresh Shavuos, so the Farbrengens was on Shabbos. And in Lamed Tes, there was a Farbrengens Shabbos Chazayin. It was the middle of the 9 days, so the Rebbe Farbrengens on Shabbos itself. Otherwise, every Shabbos Farbrengens took place on Motzei Shabbos, and it had a Shabbos ring to it. The Farbrengens was a Shabbos Dikah Farbrengens, not like a regular weekday Farbrengens. Then Tavshin Mem, there was a Farbrengens Motzei Shabbos Bereshis, there was a Farbrengens Motzei Shabbos Noach, and then Vayera was Chov Cheshvan, and the Rebbe Farbrengens on Shabbos. And then Chayesara was Motzei Shabbos, and Vayeshev was Motzei Shabbos, and Miketz was Motzei Shabbos, and Shmois was Motzei Shabbos, and that was the last time the Rebbe Farbrengens on a Motzei Shabbos instead of a Shabbos. And from then on, Yud Shevat, Tavshin Mem, Shloshim Shana was a new Tkufa, and that's when the Rebbe went back to Farbrengens on Shabbos. The reason why I'm saying this is because Shabbos Vayera, Chov Cheshvan, Tavshin Mem, the Rebbe already then began to speak about 120 years, because it was starting the 120th year, and Kapitel Kuf Chof was the Kapitel of the Rebbe Rashab for that year, starting on Chov Cheshvan, Tavshin Mem. And so Me'ah V'Esrim seemed to be a very strong emphasis. When the Frierdiker Rebbe turned 100 on Yud Beis Tammuz Tavshin Mem, there was a very strong Farbrengens Shabbos before Yud Beis Tammuz. Rebbe spoke about 100 years, and then Yud Beis Tammuz itself. But the year before that, it wasn't so strong. For whatever reason, 120 was a very big deal. And Pashtus, because Moshe Rabbeinu's years were 120, everybody gives the bracha, bis 120, and so on. So 120, beginning 120th year was already a big shturim, and then on Chov Chesed Mem Aleph was a weekday Farbrengens, and there's a video of that, was a very strong sikha. In the middle of the sikha, the Rebbe's voice broke a little bit. It seemed like the Rebbe had some kind of a cough or maybe dry. In that sikha, the Rebbe said that the Rebbe spoke about the kapitel, and the Rebbe spoke about the year, and the Rebbe spoke about the significance of the year. But one of the lines, the famous lines of that sikha, I believe it's the third sikha, maybe the second or third sikha of Chov Chesed Mem Aleph, was how Chov Cheshvan Tavshin Mem Aleph, the Rebbe said. On this very day, it's of great importance to think about the Yom Haledes, Rebbe Rashab, and Lubavitch, and Tamchet Mimim, and all the things that Rebbe Rashab meant to the world, and especially to our world, and that everybody who's a Tamim today is a Tamim because of Rebbe Rashab, and the focus on the 120th year should be on the Rebbe Rashab and all the different things that the Rebbe Rashab brought to the world. That's the very short nekuda of that sikha. So you can imagine Yud Alef Nisan is in 3 months exactly from tonight, and we have an extra month this year. It's not 2 months as it always is, but it's 3 months, and you could just imagine how many things we can focus on Yud Alef Nisan. But in order to do that, you need to be prepared for this, because there's a goal to set Lakutei Sichos, and there's the Mamorim, and there's the Igros, and then there's the Rishimus, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot to do. So it's a good time to reflect. For further reference, you can actually watch that Farbrengens of Chov Chesed Mem Aleph and learn how we should be celebrating the Rebbe's 120th birthday.
I think the Rebbe actually on Purim Lamed Gimel, which Tafshin Lamed Gimel was also EBR, and then was Shnas HaShivim. The Rebbe was studying the whole Bible, studying about the Ein Aleph Meises, which the Rebbe spoke about in the Yaf Nis Lamed Beis. So at the Farbrengens of Purim Lamed Gimel, the Rebbe spoke about that the Eibishter is the Harachamon, and he gave another month to prepare and
That was Yud Shevat Lamed Gimel.
that was Yud Shevat.
He said there's 3 months, not 2 months.
Was 3 months. Okay, thank you for the
That was
correction.
Yud Shevat Lamed Gimel.
But to actualize the Chotus.
Yeah.
All right, we will conclude this panel. Perhaps some divinity service from each person right before, just as we close shop. And we continue on to the next beautiful programs that the VAD organized over the Yud Shevat days. We'll ask Rabbi Duchman just to conclude and for bringing with us just a few words. Pale Mamish.
No words.
No words, speechless. Okay, Rabbi Feller.
Everyone has to take the opportunity to realize, like we started out, that when the Rebbe speaks to you, speaking at that moment, Kisinosim Sinai, and you have also the opportunity, especially the highest level, the peak of the hashpah that the Rebbe gave. It's not just in hashpah and Torah, but it's a hashpah in the world and everything that you need in Bona Chaim Zeni Revicha. The peak of that is in the Maimer. And if you look, every single mimer that Rebbe mentions, Kol Echad V'Achas MiYisrael, every single yid, and if you don't see it explicitly, you'll see it implicitly, see every one of them, and certainly it goes down through all the other hashpoyes that the Rebbe gives us, like Rabbi Lu mentioned. You have the sichas and the kuta sichas and the michtavim and the pictures and the videos and all the hashpoyes, the reshimas, everything that we have. Everything connects us, lifts us, and the Rebbe uses and wants us, each and every one of us, to share this hashpah with the world until the world is able to take this on their own, like will have the fulfillment of all the promises, like the Rebbe said so many times, because of Mamash.
Amen. Rabbi Lu, you often like to say how until the Rebbe, there was never a Manik Yisrael that spoke so much to Klal Yisrael. Sai in letters, and Sai in Farbrengens, and Sai by Stender Sichas, and Sai by every opportunity that the Rebbe had to speak to Klal Yisrael, the Rebbe took it. So I want to ask you, not ask you, but you can address that theme, that Australian that we have.
Yeah, no Gadol B'Yisrael spoke to kids.
No Manik Yisrael.
No Manik Yisrael. It took time for children's rallies for an hour or two and just, women like that. Well, there were women, in different, but the point that I wanted to make is we spoke before about Nigunim, and one of the most unique moments of all the years was Yud Aleph Nisan Tafshin Lamed Beis, after the Maimer, when they sang B'char Hashem Chasisi for the 3rd time in that Farbrengen. And after that, Nigan, the Rebbe said that he was waiting for his Oididus Miyuchada. He was waiting for a special moment to talk about this Ein Aleph Meistes, which eventually that was the Sikha, that the Rebbe wanted 71 new institutions by next Yud Aleph Nisan. Now that Nigan, it says in the Hanocha that they sang B'char Hashem Chasisi with their great Oididus. Now, when I was a kid, I went through the Hanochas and I saw that line, that line does not appear in any other page of the Rebbe's Torah, that they sang in Nigan. I sang in Nigan, and it was with a special method, and the Rebbe reacted to that. That's so unusual. And how did the Rebbe react? The Rebbe reacted by saying, let's get to work. I only saw the video of it when it was available, maybe 15 years ago or so. And I spent an entire night watching that over and over again. It was 5:30 in the morning before I stopped. And I mamish felt like I was there. I was completely concentrated. Also, about 25 minutes. It was so special that I believe, if I was feeling this, and I asked a lot of people who were there, I said, would you agree that everyone who was there was just basically screaming to the Rebbe, I love you? And everybody would say, oh, well, that's a very good take on it. But I mamish felt that when I watched the video, because I wasn't just watching the video. I transported myself into that video, into that scene. I felt it. And that's something extremely unusual, because you know about the Rebbe saying a mimer, and people very inspired by the mimer. You know, they're about the Rebbe saying a sicha and hadronim, nigla, a sicha and chassidus, a sicha of halacha, a sicha about Israel and politics, or about America. There's so many different sides to each Farbrengen, basically. From nigla to chassidus to Kabbalah to on Shabbos with the Rebbe's father, like nonstop. But there was also nigunim, as Rabbi Blesofksy said before. And here's a moment where it was just a niggin, and yet the Rebbe addressed that and responded or reacted to that. And so every one of us, even if you're not shaykh to nigla, chassidus, halacha, drush, whatever it might be, you are shaykh to the niggin. I have a friend, when I was in Olateira, who was one of our friends. And he was not shaykh to any of the sikhs, but he knew every niggin and what the Rebbe did in each niggin. For him, that was the whole Farbrengen. There is opportunities for everyone to connect to the Rebbe. He coming up to 120 years, it's right, the mimer is too far-fetched for me. I don't have any patience for the mimer. Try the hadron. You don't like the hadron? Try the Alter Rebbe's niggin or some other niggin. Get attached, get involved, put yourself there. We have videos. No other God will be Israel who taught Torah, and it's on video. You can do it. You can all be part of it. Not just as Zikaron, but it should also be a practical today, now. You can get into it. But you've got to put your focus in it. Just like we did at the Farbrengens, you can do that today as well. It's time to get connected, guys.
Shikayach, Rabbi Lou.
My take on these Seder's is that I was there for Yud of Nissen. I remember the first dig and the Ligan and the sailors and everything that goes along with it. Just to think about it, okay? Yud of Nissen, I'm at base not such a long time ago. I mean, it's in my lifetime, in our lifetime, okay? The Rebbe then spoke about a dream, you know, to have Ayin out of Mezes, 71 Mezes, and you just mentioned about the Farbrengen Yud Shevat. You know, you speak about the Mezes that were made for the Ayin out of Mezes. You know, it's you know, I wouldn't detail too much around it in terms of Gmachen and other things. And now, in the time that we see the Rebbe, the Keich of the Rebbe, the Chassidim of the Rebbe, the Shluchim of the Rebbe, that Ayin Aleph Mezes, 7,000 Mezes today is a joke compared to the Ayin Aleph Mezes the Rebbe spoke about then, that we could do. To see what the Rebbe accomplished, that each one of us is zeicha to be part of this. After all, we're here, and we have a connection to it.
Shikayach, Rabbi Duchman. Just to conclude, Aharon Chaviv, Aharon Akain, as the Rebbe knew you as. Maybe we'll say the story afterwards. So, Reb Aharon.
Shikayach, Rabbi Pearson,
Shikayach. Reb Aharon, if you can please conclude.
For the talented way of leading the panel and bringing out all these amazing things. And whoever's the organizer, Shikayach, for counting me in, because I received much more. If I gave anything, Baruch Hashem, but I received much, much more. It's a privilege to be here.
Reb Aharon, we would like to hear some concluding words for you, and connection to the Rebbe Farbrengens today and its relevance.
I compliment the Duchman today.
Can hear
I
you.
want to give a compliment to the Duchman today, that the Duchman today are more bucky, with all due respect to Sholom Duchman and Mendel and Rabbi Lou. They are mamish bikim, and when the Rebbe said, what sicher? I go to the very often for Shabbos, and they correct me when I say the Rebbe said something this year. Say, no, you're wrong. The Rebbe said it differently. The Duchman today are bucky. So the relevance to the Rebbe's Farbrengens. I think the Bachram are quite tuned into the relevance. They are very, very much into the Rebbe's Farbrengens. They know the siches, the videos, and the swarm from the Shabbos Farbrengens. Baruch Hashem, they're very much into it. Even the Mekan in that respect.
Yasher koach to all those who came in person, all those who are watching on Zoom, and those who will watch afterwards, the recording. As B'ez Geil Tzedek, the Eibusher should take a help that we should be all zeiche to stand at the Rebbe's Farbrengens once again with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu Tegef Umayad Mamash. Shekech to all the panelists and all the organizers, Hatamim Ben Tzion Shtroks, Hatamim Shabi Sofer, Hatamim Mendel Banon, Hatamim Mendel Azimov, and the Menal of Vat Hamidatvim, Reb Tzvi Hirsch Altein, for putting this beautiful event together. We're Vizeiche Bekar Mamish to be reunited with the Rebbe Dolamato. L'chaim.